thinking that I won't react. You whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den. Bet you wish you stayed at home. Begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet. My legend's written in the stone, yeah. You're crying, Adrian, defeat is now your only friend. Even your mama's gotta know. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 First round, fifth round, final round. Oh, 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 yeah. First round, fifth round, final round. No, 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 no. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh. You didn't bust. Oh, 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 oh.
All right, so now that was brilliant. That was brilliantly said, and the good news is I can say that because nobody else heard it. So I can never get, I can never. So what I'm going to do now is, and then I don't, you know what? This is just, I'm going to have to spend all day tomorrow making sure that this doesn't happen again, because it's this is really obviously completely unacceptable. But while I can hear you, and this was the same as the other one, nobody else has been able to hear you. So, could you? So, what was it that you said 30 seconds ago? Could you repeat that?
I think that Fred Flintstone was a man before his time.
Fred Flintstone was, yep, that was about what you said. Yeah. Now, well, okay. So he was talking about why the U.S. ostensibly does not negotiate with terrorists, and he is correct. We should not be negotiating with terrorists. We do sometimes anyway. It's a real problem, and oh dear Lord. So I don't think we're gonna default though. But it's
you can only expect eloquence out of me once. and that I'm done.
I've noticed that pattern. All right, so perfect. Well, and the other, let me just do one other really quick thing. And well, I can do that later. So today we are going to be discussing conspiracy theories, and we have on a guest. You've been looking forward to the show for a while, haven't you?
I have. Didn't you hear the new one?
No. There's a new one. There's always a new one.
the big Cheeto is actually the one that was supporting and driving and directing the Taliban to be able to take over the country faster, so that Biden would look worse.
Oh dear Lord!
That's got to be a true one, right?
Well, I don't like the people involved, and it speaks negatively of them, so it must be true. So, all right. Well, without any further ado, then, and then let me just what I'd like to do is, and I just want to make sure. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So our guest today is a PhD in philosophy, actually, and so he is Mr. M. Mr. M. Dentith. I think I have that on the thing wrong, but and I don't see him. So, but he is here, and everyone should be able to hear him. So, M, how are you? There you are.
I'm good. I'm as we said before the show. It's 31 degrees here in Zhuhai in the south of China, so I'm ever so slightly toasty, but I'm ready to go.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. What time is it over there? Oh,
it is now 11 past 9 in the morning. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm glad that worked out then for you, and we could do this. So, you have a PhD in philosophy.
I do indeed, a PhD in philosophy on conspiracy theory.
Oh, what inspired you to do that?
Well, right. So I completed my PhD back in 2012. So we're talking before the end time. So before conspiracy theories was a hot and sexy topic in public discourse. And so what inspired me to do a PhD in conspiracy theories in the discipline of epistemology, the study of knowledge, which is one of the subdisciplines of philosophy, was actually a homegrown conspiracy theory in the town that I grew up in. So I grew up in a small coastal village called Devonport, which is located in Auckland, which is New Zealand's largest city. And Devonport has this recurrent conspiracy theory that at some time between the 1890s and the 1940s, a very large and elaborate military fortification was built into a hill in Devonport called North Head, in which tunnels were built, in which treasures were hidden, and those treasures are being kept from public view. Now, I grew up in Devonport, and I grew up with rumours and gossip about these hidden tunnels deep within North Head. And so when I was doing philosophy at the University of Auckland, it became a kind of interest in my mind to go, what is it about this conspiracy theory which continues to persist in my local community and seems to be very elaborate, the idea of this being a hidden military bunker system beneath a hill in a very populous part of Devonport that some people have seen, but most of the public aren't aware of, which alleges that the government is complicit in hiding the fact of the existence of this bunker system. And so that ended up being kind of the motivating example for my PhD in philosophy, even though, weirdly enough, that example never actually appears in the PhD itself. By the time I actually finished the PhD, I had moved on to much more exotic global examples and left Devonport behind.
So, what is it about conspiracy theories that you find interesting?
I guess I find them interesting because I know at least at one point in time, I was very tempted by them. This is going to be a weird sentence because my philosophical work, by and large, defends conspiracy theorizing and argues that we should take conspiracy theories seriously because we should be concerned about the existence of conspiracies in our polities. By and large, most of us will agree conspiracies are bad. Most of us will also agree that conspiracies have occurred, and most of us will agree that some conspiracy theories have turned out to be true. And yet I don't believe all that many of the kind of weird and wacky conspiracy theories that people are kind of vexed by. And so I think what started my interest in this topic was trying to work out, why is it the case that I'm largely skeptical of conspiracy theory, even though I'm not skeptical of the existence of conspiracies? And then that morphed into my latter day work, which is a kind of a defense of conspiracy theorizing, which still confronts me to a certain extent, because there are many conspiracy theories that I do just immediately roll my eyes at, even though when I think about them, probably someone should be treating them seriously, because if they turn out to be true, we probably want to put a stop to them.
Yeah, I don't know any theories like Pizzagate. Excuse me. Oh, jeez. Ow. Okay. Sorry.
That's a nasty cough you've got there. You should see a doctor and get some ivermectin down that throat immediately. That'll clear it up.
I'll go right ahead and do that. All right. So, are there? I'd like to get into some of your favorite conspiracies, both sort of, and I don't live in the U.S., but I'm sure you have plenty of American ones. Most of our audience is U.S., though certainly not all of them. But American conspiracy theories abroad. But were there any conspiracy theories that surprised you in some way, either because you thought they had to be fake, and then you realized that either maybe a key point in them was true, or maybe they were entirely true, or maybe surprised you because you really did get suckered by it for a while, and then, what was anything that really kind of shocked you in your study of conspiracy theories?
Well, I mean, I suppose the one which actually does get me to a certain extent, for one which I probably did seriously consider for a chunk of my life, and we're going back here to my preteen and teenage self, I was quite taken by the work of Erich von Däniken, and the idea that ancient gods are in fact actually, the reports of ancient gods are in fact actually ancient peoples reporting experiences with extraterrestrials. And there was a period of my life when I was younger where I kind of thought that seemed like a fairly plausible hypothesis, one that we should at least take seriously. That kind of got scuppered at one point, because one of Erich von Däniken's big chains of evidence is claiming that there are all of these hieroglyphic inscriptions found both in the top of Africa and the middle of America, which he claims are examples of circuit boards, of the aliens basically leaving behind instructions for building devices. And my father is an electrical engineer, and one day I showed him the evidence of these circuit boards, and he just very patiently pointed out to me that those circuit boards cannot work because the bits are not connected together in any way, shape, or form. And that was also kind of the first debunking effort I saw, where someone just very patiently went, yeah, I know on a surface level, it looks vaguely like this other thing you're aware of, but actually with serious consideration, it turns out there's no real connection there at all. So the ancient aliens hypothesis is both an example of something which I probably did take seriously when I was younger, and also was patiently dissuaded of around about that point in time as well. In the more modern era, of course, when we start talking about surprising conspiracy theories, there are an awful lot of them about. And a lot of them do seem to be kind of exemplars we find in the US political system. I was somewhat surprised by the various ways in which people reacted to the Russiagate conspiracy theory, both from the right and the left, in that people on the right were going with there's nothing to it whatsoever. People on the left, I mean, these are very, very broad binary categorizations. I'm aware there's a lot of middle ground here, but it seemed, at least from outside the US, the discourse was people on the right didn't believe there was anything to it at all. People on the left thought it was clear evidence of complicity of Russia with the Trump election team. And of course, it seems that actually the real explanation is going to be somewhere in between, that it wasn't quite the big conspiracy that some left-wing pundits made it out to be. But it certainly wasn't a nothing burger that many of the right-wing pundits made it out to be. But of course, the really big one, the one which I'm actually surprised is still persisting, is of course good old QAnon, which just seems like a live action role-playing game that has gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, well, and it's yeah, and it looks like it's going to start to turn violent if we don't. So, why do people get so wrapped up in these conspiracy theories?
Well, I mean, so there are two ways to answer that. There's the psychological position, and of course, I can't really speak about psychology because I'm not a psychologist. I'm a philosopher. There's a huge literature in social psychology on this particular topic, some of which I think is quite good, some of which I think actually rest upon some shaky assumptions. But from a philosophical perspective, I think one of the reasons why people end up being attracted to conspiracy theories is that depending on where you are in the world, you are aware that conspiracies have occurred. And the US political system is a nice example of this. So there's a great book by Catherine Olmsted called 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐴. It's a history of political scandals over the course of the 20th century. Catherine is a historian at, I think, USC, although you probably want to check that. She's in one of the Californian universities. And it's basically a history of all sorts of things from the lead up to the US entering World War II, Watergate, the assassination of JFK, Iran-Contra, and the like. And it's just a very carefully written history book that points out that, look, there were an awful lot of political shenanigans going on behind the scenes, some of which really do look incredibly conspiratorial. And anyone who is politically literate, who knows just a little bit about these situations, will suddenly be very aware that actually conspiracies probably happen more often than politicians are willing to admit to. And not just that, politicians have been in the past quite successful in just dismissing talk of conspiracies by labeling them as conspiracy theories. And once you kind of glom onto that notion, it doesn't seem unreasonable to then start thinking, well, maybe conspiracies are behind other events in the world. And that's why I have a kind of conditional defense of conspiracy theorizing. I don't think it's irrational to suspect that there are conspiracies going on around us, because historically speaking, conspiracies were a feature of 20th century Western politics. They certainly seem like they're a feature of 21st century Western style parliamentary or bicameral system, political systems around the world. And so it's reasonable to start suspecting these things. Of course, it's one thing to contemplate conspiracy. It's another thing to then start saying this conspiracy theory is actually true. And I think that's where a lot of the debate ends up. How do we move from justifying our suspicion that conspiracies occur, which I think is fairly easy to do, to then going, and now we can say this particular conspiracy theory is the best explanation of this weird event we're seeing in the world. And of course, the great example of that is the stolen election hypothesis, which wrecked your country last year and the beginning of this year.
It ain't done.
I don't think
it ain't done.
Yeah.
Sorry to say, it ain't even close. But
yeah, I mean, I see, because you had the Arizona recount, which both sides are now saying proves their particular hypothesis. So I see Lynn Wood has come out saying, well, look, they did a recount, so it's not unreasonable for me to ask for other recounts. People should apologize to me for demanding additional recounts. Well, the other side is going, we did the recount, we found no evidence of fraud. I think that kind of shows that you were, probably making things up, Lynn. So, yeah, I realize it's an ongoing situation. And I mean, I saw with the gubernatorial recall in California a few weeks ago. Larry Elder had published a webpage prior to the recall election occurring, already alleging that the results, nights before, that the results were fraudulent and were going to be recounted, despite the fact that by the point the webpage was published, the recall hadn't occurred, and you'd only put that up if you were trying to insincerely allege election fraud.
Yeah, he was using and he said that Bowen, I think it's Bowen. I want to say it's Bowen, the mathematical law that states that in natural numbers, in many natural systems, you will find that the number 1, for example, will be the first number in any set of digits 30% of the time, and 9 will be less than 5% of the time. The higher the number, the less. And it's true. It just happens to be true. It's the IRS uses it, and he was claiming that. Yeah, yes, he claimed fraud. He claimed fraud before the results were in. So before it even started, before the first vote was cast. So oh God, it's we also had on Dr. John Shook, who is a PhD in philosophy from, oh God, I almost said Brandeis. It's not, oh Jesus, I'll remember it. But we did a whole thing on post-truth, a post-truth world where truth really seems to not be of value anymore in the same way that it used to be. So I think that this kind of dovetails with that. I also think, to what extent do you think, I mean, it seems to me that it's got to be kind of self-aggrandizing to say that you've spotted a theory that nobody else has, or you've spotted a conspiracy that nobody else has, or a small, but, it's like, I did all this research, and I know in part because I'm a little guilty of it, but I did all this research into JFK, and I know what really happened, despite, 500 million people looking into it, and they've all reached their own conclusions. It seems to me to be self-aggrandizing to believe in these things.
Yes, I mean, I do think there is something interesting about the dictum, do your own research. In fact, actually, there was a very interesting keynote presentation at the Australian Association of Philosophy back in July by Neil Levy, an Australian philosopher who also deals with conspiracy theories. And he kind of argues that that's where conspiracy theorists go wrong, that people feel that doing their own research will trump the evidence of experts or appeals to expertise. And he points out that in some cases, that is the case. In fact, experts become experts by doing their own research. But on average, it's more successful to trust in experts than it is to do your own research. So on average, you'll get better results by deferring to authority than you will do by doing your own research into topics. And the argument kind of goes something along the lines of, we think we're pretty good at sorting out fact from fiction, but actually it turns out that's something which you need expertise in. So if you're doing your own research without appeals to expertise, you've got the problem of trying to sort between good and bad evidence, which is actually quite difficult. Now, as I say, I think there is something to that. There are certainly certain conspiracy theorists out there who pride themselves on at least appearing to do their own research. Alex Jones claims that he spends 8 or 9 hours of every night when he should be sleeping doing the reading for his show, where he's about to give you a breaking story, which he's done hours and hours of research, and then he will then pivot into an ad for male vitality pills and then never get back to the topic at hand, which might actually suggest he's not doing his own research. He's simply spinning yarns to get people to listen to his increasingly bizarre ad pivots every 15 minutes or so. But yes, I mean, there is something to the idea that maybe people do go slightly wrong when they do their own research. But of course, the counter to that is that we've got lots of examples of people claiming that they've got expertise backing up their claims, where it turns out doing a little of your own research indicates that can't be the case. And the great example of that was, of course, the invasion of Iraq back in 2003. Both the US and the UK claimed that they had experts, intelligent experts, who were, the people on the ground who are able to detect when people are lying or concealing things. And those experts were adamant that the Saddam Hussein regime was developing weapons of mass destruction in contravention of agreements after the First Gulf War, and this justified an immediate military invasion of Iraq to stop this despot from using those weapons of mass destruction in the global war on terror. And people did some elementary research, and they went, well, that doesn't seem to actually accord with what other people are saying on the ground. Now, admittedly, what was helping there was that there was a rival set of experts, the UN weapons inspectors, who were going, well, we've been here for several years now, and yes, it's true the Iraqis do sometimes fob us off or, distract us from things, but they're by and large distracting us things from minor affairs. There's no evidence of a WMD process going on in Iraq at all. But it just required people doing a little bit of their own research to realize actually the experts that the US and the UK are trouting out weren't really either the right experts or, controversially, actually telling major lies, and a little bit of research kind of uncovered that conspiracy.
All right, so 𝐒𝐨𝐻𝐿 has been suspiciously quiet, and so I just want to check in and see if there was anything any opportunities.
He probably choked to death on that ivermectin that he was swallowing before.
No, I had a massive brain hemorrhage because of the amount of chloroquine or whatever the heck that other drug is.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
Yes. I took a little too much, and I think I ended up with a brain aneurysm.
You realize even a little bit is we did this. We read the back label of hydroxychloroquine a couple of days ago. My favorite is as for adverse side effects: no blood pressure, no pulse. That's a friggin' side effect. Go to mayoclinic.org and look up side effects. It's like, it's called death. They just don't want to put it on the label, so they say no.
It might not be death. It might just be incipient zombification. I mean, the person who takes hydroxychloroquine could be wandering around eating people's brains.
Well, I will let you know should I start craving any odd or unusual things, or if bits of flesh begin to rot off. I'll keep you updated.
Is it strange that, in my view, that doesn't make the drug all that much worse than it already is? That's just nasty stuff. All right, so any thoughts?
I love listening about conspiracy theories. Are very interesting to me because some of them seem like so blatantly not even plausible, and yet there's a huge number of people that still believe in them. And there's others such as, say, the moon landing was faked, where it's like, well, wait a minute, of course you do have to appeal to experts who have studied in the field, especially in things like photography, videography, and when you actually look at, it's like, okay, well, what would have actually been required to actually fake this? And it's like, well, it's taken more work to fake it than to actually have done it. And yet there are still people out there that firmly believe that we didn't actually go to the moon. And so for things like that to continue to persist, in the face of quite a lot of evidence supporting that it did, I always find fascinating. And one of the things I kind of wanted to get maybe your opinion. I know you said you weren't why am I having so many? I talked to you earlier today and you used up all of my brain power, and now you're not a psychologist.
That's true, I'm not.
One of the things that I kind of like to get your take on is I've always kind of suspected that because by and large, plenty of exceptions, but by and large, life in the West is pretty good. We're not struggling nearly as much as, say, we were in 1903, or 1677. So, we have a lot more free time on our hands, and, there's not a lot of challenges for us to overcome. And I have a fefeeling that due to our history and all of the challenges that our species has had to overcome, I'm thinking that maybe in the West we're getting a little bored. Things are just too good, and there isn't enough challenges for us to overcome to occupy our time, efforts, and energies. And so we're now placing them into more destructive means. And also less useful means. So I always kind of wonder if people get kind of sucked into that because they don't really have anything better to do. There's nothing else challenging them that's requiring their brain power. So, they look for something that's more interesting or that would make the world significantly different than what they're actually living in because they're craving adventure.
idle hands and all that. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
And I mean, it is an interesting hypothesis. The problem with the hypothesis is that we've actually got quite a lot of polling data for belief in conspiracy theories over time. So I'm actually now pointing towards the work of Joe Parent and 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐿, who are both at the University of Miami in Florida. Turns out there's more than one Miami University in the US, of which only one is located in Florida itself, as we discovered at a conference a few years ago, where someone from Miami University and the University of Miami were both speaking at the same conference. Everyone assumed they must know each other because they're at the same university, and they had to patiently point out that Miami University is kind of half a country away from the University of Miami. So this is a little fun fact about university names. But Joe and Joe have basically looked at belief in conspiracy theories in the US over the course of the 20th century. This is summarized in their book, American Conspiracy Theories. It's published by Oxford University Press, I think back in the glory days of about 2014 or so. And their results seem to indicate that actually the kind of height of conspiratorial discussion and politicking is sometime around about the 1960s. Despite what it looks like, actually belief in conspiracy theories has been gently trending down since the 60s to the present day. There's a bit of a question as to whether there's been an uptick between 2016 to now, although Joe's recent work for the Pew Research Center doesn't really seem to indicate there's been any massive surge in belief. And so it seems actually, even though we've got more time on our hands, we're actually less inclined to believe conspiracy theories now than we were, say, in the 60s, where people were busy working nine to five jobs and having absolutely no free time whatsoever. So it might be the case that actually all that idle time has actually led to people thinking more clearly about things and realizing, actually, when I think about it, that's probably not the best idea at all.
Well, I hope that's true.
Well, so now there's, at least in the U.S., there's been a sudden uptick in conspiracy theories, and it starts. I think that I observed shortly before Trump came into office. It's persisted easily through till now. Is this a global phenomenon or just in the U.S.? And because as I understand, at least in the U.K., they're actually having some similar issues with Boris Johnson. And what was the other one? I want to say Theresa May, but I don't remember. And so is this a global phenomenon or just in the U.S.? And in either case, what's sparking it, do you think?
So it's a little bit hard to tell because, of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and there are, of course, numerous conspiracy theories about the origin, purpose, and transmission of COVID-19. And given the pandemic is affecting everyone across the globe, I'm very much aware that there's been at least the appearance of an uptick of belief in conspiracy theories back home in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We have our anti-maskers. We have the people who are making claims about the vaccines, which are unfounded or actual cases of disinformation being promoted by the usual suspects and the like. And so there does appear to at least be the sudden surge of discussion of conspiracy theories going on around us. But the important thing to note here is that we're talking here about an uptick in kind of media discourse about conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are suddenly big news. We're talking about them a lot. In the US, we're talking about them a lot because you had a president who was using conspiracy rhetoric on a day-to-day basis whilst in control of the country. It wasn't simply someone on the opposition grousing about how they'd lost an election. This was the so-called leader of the free world engaging in conspiracy theories from their pulpit of control. And of course, in the UK, you've got all of the farrago around Brexit and what's going on there. But once again, we're talking here about a kind of uptick in discourse around conspiracy theories. And I want to draw an analogy between that and the way we talk about violent crime. So if we look at the incidence of violent crime in the West, it's been on a kind of downward curve since the middle of the last century. There's actually less violent crime going on now than there was in the middle of the 20th century, which means that when violent crime occurs, it's suddenly a lot more notable than it was in the middle of the 20th century. Things which wouldn't get routinely reported because they were just routine aspects of normal life are suddenly these really weird big events that have become newsworthy. And one way to think about what's going on with discussion of conspiracy theory here is that if it is the case that there's been a kind of downward turn in conspiracy theories being expressed by people, that suddenly makes them more newsworthy, which then makes them look as if they're more prevalent than they are. And this is kind of a weird form of the backfire effect. So we know from psychological studies that if the media talks about violent crime, people think there's a violent crime wave going on, even if statistically there's less violent crime going on now than there was 10 or 20 years ago. We might be seeing a similar effect around conspiracy theories in that because they're so notable by how exceptionally rare they are compared to, say, in the middle of the last century, the media suddenly finding them newsworthy is having the kind of perverse effect of people thinking, well, there must be a lot of them about, even though when we look, say, at the Pew Research Center polls on what people believe and how many people believe, it turns out most Americans have never heard of QAnon. And the ones who have heard of QAnon, only a tiny minority think there's any plausibility to that claim, which kind of is in stark difference to the way the media talks about QAnon as a kind of recurrent danger which is about to swamp your republic.
Yeah. Well, but I will say, though, that may be true of QAnon, but in terms of, and I'm curious, and this gets to a good question of how do you define a conspiracy theory? At what point is something just a bunch of jerks getting together doing something bad, and when is it a conspiracy? Because there's something like, I think last I heard, 60 or 70% of Republicans in this country believe that the election was rigged and or stolen from Trump. That's a staggeringly high number of just about any group for ostensibly a free country and a democratic country. Also a large number, it appears from where I'm sitting that a large number do believe that COVID is okay, let's get it. We're gonna get into some whether or not COVID was created in a lab. A number I think it was, and then released. But it seems like at least there's some evidence coming out even to support that one, and or that it's actually completely fake. COVID doesn't exist, and this is a means to give everyone free Wi-Fi by injecting 5G chips. I don't know the theory. I'm just saying like what I've heard. So I got the vaccine. My Wi-Fi did get better, but I'm going to say that maybe that was just a coincidence. What? Yeah. So it seems like there's definitely more here. What constitutes a conspiracy? So if I say I think the election was rigged and stolen, but it's kind of nebulous, and I'm not saying that everyone got together and did it, but I don't see how it could happen without a whole bunch of people conspiring or colluding. What makes something a conspiracy theory versus just either accusing someone of a crime or whatever?
All right, so let's define what counts as a conspiracy first, because what counts as a conspiracy theory kind of depends on what you take a conspiracy to be. Right. So a conspiracy is two or more people working together in secret, attempting to bring about some end. So it has to be two or more people, because to conspire requires you to breathe together in the Latin, so it's a plot of more than one. It has to be in secret because, of course, you want to get away with your plot. You want to make sure that the people you're trying to affect aren't aware of what you're up to. And you have to at least be attempting to achieve some end. So there's no requirement conspiracies be successful. It's just simply you are trying to achieve some particular end goal. And of course, if you accept that as your definition of conspiracy, then certain things count as conspiracy theories and certain things don't. So, for example, if you think that Lee Harvey Oswald and only Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible for the assassination of JFK, then that isn't going to be a conspiracy theory because there's no conspiracy there. If Oswald acted on his own, he wasn't conspiring. He was simply an assassin who was lucky enough to get off the shots and not lucky enough to get away or survive. If you think that Lee Harvey Oswald had help, then suddenly you're getting into the realm of a claim of conspiracy because you've got Lee Harvey Oswald and some other people being involved. Now, of course, this gets you into a really interesting discussion about the hierarchical nature of how conspiracies might work. It's possible that conspiracies could be constructed that only a few people actually know what the plot is, but they're using other people to bring about that plot. The example that I like to use actually goes all the way back to ancient Rome. So Julius Caesar was assassinated by a conspiracy of senators. The senators all seem to have slightly different ideas as to why they were killing Caesar. According to most of them, they were committing this conspiracy to kill Caesar to return the Roman Republic back to senatorial control. But it turns out a few of the members of the conspiracy, Marcus Brutus, Servilius Casca, and Gaius Longinus, they had a different idea in mind. They wanted to install Marcus Brutus as the new dictator of Rome. And they were the ones who were kind of the prime orchestrator of the conspiracy. They knew exactly what they desired. And they kind of conned the other members in with Republican values. We will get rid of the dictator. We will return Rome to proper control. While secretly they're laughing away going, ah, ha, 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 ha. They don't know what's really going to happen. Soon Brutus will control the Republic. Of course, it didn't work out that way because they didn't account for Mark Antony or young Augustus and how they would kind of make their plan go awry. So conspiracies can be structured in such a way that a few people might know the actual end goal and other people might be patsies. But you still need, two or more people working together for it to count as being a conspiracy. So we've got kind of conspiracy encapsulated there. Two or more people working together in secret to achieve some end. I take it that a conspiracy theory is simply any explanation that cites a conspiracy as a salient cause of some event. So if you say a conspiracy brought about this event, you are putting forward a conspiracy theory. Now, this definition of conspiracy theory might go against the way that people use the term in common language, because most people assume a conspiracy theory is a bad theory involving a conspiracy, a theory which isn't likely to be true. I go, well, because we know that some conspiracy theories which have been labeled as bad theories have turned out to actually be true nonetheless, what we should be saying in this kind of situation is going, look, a conspiracy theory is just any explanation of an event that cites a conspiracy. And thus we should have a perfectly neutral definition which applies to all types of events. The salient question is which ones are warranted, i.e. which ones have the evidence to back them up, and which ones turn out to be spurious, which is to say, actually, when you analyze them, it turns out they're not true at all. And I argue somebody needs to sit down and do the time to sort between the good and the bad, because some theories which have looked pretty wacky and unbelievable have turned out to be true.
That was one of the things that you said early on that actually was, I think, so far the most surprising thing you've said. And I was not expecting, and I think is very interesting, was that, of course, you're not against conspiracy theories because it's the only way to find real conspiracies, which, of course, do exist. It starts with a theory, and then somebody finds out it's true, and we know that they can be true. I am curious, and since you did work in epistemology, so I'm curious if this is at least ancillary to that, which is how many I don't I wouldn't even hazard a guess. I used to say exactly what you suggested, which was all conspiracy theories are just, well, they're not all crackpot, but most of them have to be false. So it's just crackpot theory, crackpot theory, crackpot theory. But when you take a look at all of the theories that people hold, whether they're conspiracy theories or not, what is it? 3,000 mutually excommunicative sects of Christianity. These are sects of Christianity that think all the others are not going to be saved. They refuse to say that means they're going to hell, but they're not going to be saved. So they all disagree on ostensibly the only thing that matters in Christianity, which is how does Jesus save you? Between any other claim that, okay, the guy who cut me off in the freeway this morning did so because he's an asshole, not because he was running late, not because he didn't see me in his rearview mirror, but because that's why he did it. So how many of all the claims we make are conspiracy theories actually any less likely to, or more likely, do you think? And I don't know if you've seen any research, but it sounds to me like maybe they're just similar to almost any other hypothesis one would make it off the cuff.
You've hit the nail exactly on the head. So I think part of the problem that a lot of the literature on conspiracy theory faces is they kind of silo off, talk about conspiracy theories and hold a really weird standard to conspiracy theories as theories about the world. Because it turns out most of our beliefs are going to be bad when tested. And most of our theories turn out to not survive rigorous testing. An analogy I've used in several places is that, look, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of new scientific theories being developed every week, if not every day. So scientists in labs theorizing about the world, coming up with a hypothesis or a theory, which they then engage in research in. Most of those theories, the vast majority of them, will not survive testing. They'll turn out to be unwarranted. They'll turn out to be bad theories. And we see this in history. There's been a lot of historical theories which have been jettisoned over time because it turns out they rest on shaky assumptions, like the so-called great man of history hypothesis that kind of said that all historical events are due to the actions of great men changing the world. And then Marxist historians pointed out, actually, most history can be explained by social pressures in which great men are kind of the epiphenomena of, but actually it's kind of processes in the background that better explain history. So psychological theories come and go. We were having a discussion in the pre-show about dietary theories. The number of dietary theories I've seen in my short time on Earth is astounding. People have gone, cholesterol's good, cholesterol's bad. Too much salt is good, too little salt is good. Too much blood is good, not enough blood is good. There just seems to be all these different theories going on all the time. Most of our theories turn out to not survive testing. Why do we treat conspiracy theories as being the special case where there's this remarkably high standard when it comes to talking of conspiracy theories that we don't apply to other theories in the world? So yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It turns out that actually most of our beliefs aren't particularly good when tested. Very few actually survive a rigorous analysis.
Well, and I wanted to point out, too, that even in the examples that you gave, they struck me as rather charitable. So if a scientist comes up with a hypothesis, it's not a shot in the dark. It's an educated hypothesis based on their experience with probably specifically the whatever it is, if a biochemist comes up with a hypothesis about a particular biochemical process, they at least have enough background where they can make an educated guess. They may be right, they may be wrong, but it's not a complete shot in the dark. If I hear a conspiracy theory about voting or bacteria escaping a lab, I'm not a scientist. I don't know what the likelihood is of bacteria escaping a lab. I'm not a spy. I don't know how often, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to opine on it. So yeah, that's an interesting. I think that's going to be for me a very interesting takeaway from this show. So now, if I hear a conspiracy theory, what's the best way to research it? What's the best way if I want to figure out if it's true or not? And you mentioned earlier something along the lines of you can do your own research, but you also have to listen to experts. Experts can be wrong. Oftentimes they became experts by doing their own research, but it also doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily know better than an expert. So that's I want to know if it's likely or not that Wuhan escaped a lab in Wuhan, China. How do I start going about trying to find a way where either I could put it to a Bayesian analytical, come up with some probability, or say I believe it or I don't?
So that's a really good question, and it's something which I've been grappling with for a while. So I published a paper which technically got released last year called Debunking Conspiracy Theories in early access. It's now been formally published in a printed version of the journal Synthase as of a few weeks ago. And in Debunking Conspiracy Theories, which is it's to my mind a cleverly named paper, because even though it's called Debunking Conspiracy Theories, the entire paper is about why using the framing device of debunking conspiracy theories is the wrong approach to the analysis of these things. So the paper looks as if it's going to tell you how to debunk them. It actually then argues that that's the wrong approach. The right approach, I think, is to find a solution to what I call the economic argument. So the economic argument goes a little like this. I am a specialist on conspiracy theory. So I call myself and my colleagues in academia who work on conspiracy theories, conspiracy theory theorists. We're the theorists of conspiracy theory. You wouldn't believe the number of conspiracy theories I'm told on a day-by-day basis. It's incomprehensible, the number of theories that people present me with. So it's kind of impossible for me to get any expertise in the number of theories I encounter day by day. It would require more than a day to do the research to get to grips with just one of them. So the economic argument is most of us do not have the time or the energy or expertise to by ourselves do our own research on a conspiracy theory. What we need is there to be kind of standing citizens' assemblies or committees that are kind of devoted to doing this work in what's called a social epistemic framework. So my particular specialty in epistemology is this thing called social epistemology. And social epistemologists are very concerned with the idea that actually most of what we know, we learn from other people. And a lot of our knowledge claims are kind of built upon trusting people in a community. So the only reason I know anything about history is I was taught history. And I have read the books of people who have reported events in the past. They have no direct evidence of what went on in ancient Rome 2030 years ago. All I've got is what was written down and what historians believe. So most of my knowledge is in some sense socially constituted. I've learnt it from other people. Once you start to recognize that most of our knowledge turns out to be social, then you realize the best way to solve knowledge problems in the world, which is, and I mean, we see this in the sciences. Scientists don't sit down by themselves, generate theories, and then by themselves test those theories to see whether they're correct. They form research teams. They get funding. They bring in peer reviewers and advisors. They form a community around themselves so that they can test these ideas. We should be doing the same thing about claims of conspiracy. We should get a community of people with different views and different expertise on the conspiracy theories we're investigating. And we should work as a community to try to solve the problem of whether this conspiracy theory is good or bad. Because if I can't do it on my own, and I'm kind of an expert in this field, you can't really expect an ordinary member of the public with less time, because I mean, I'm basically paid.
This is what you do, yeah.
Most other people have at least 9 to 5 jobs, if not 8 to 6 jobs, or 8 to 8 jobs. They don't have the time to then spend the next 16 hours of their day thinking about these things. That's why we need these standing committees to investigate these claims. And the thing is, these committees kind of do exist, not in the conspiracy theory sense, but they do exist elsewhere. So the Republic of Ireland has been using citizens' assemblies for decades now to investigate issues in their political system. So they had a citizens' assembly on abortion rights in the Republic of Ireland, which is why a majority Catholic nation is now going through major abortion law reform, because the Citizens' Assembly was able to produce this report arguing as to why Ireland needed to change their view on abortion. So we know these systems can work. The problem, of course, is how do you constitute them? And also, how do you constitute them in such a way that governments aren't going to swoop in and then control them? Because, of course, most of the conspiracy theories we're vexed by are conspiracy theories which are about the government, who are likely to be involved in the formation of these committees, or at least have a vested interest in controlling how the results of these committees are reported to the public. That's the problem which I'm trying to resolve now.
The biggest conspiracy theories that I'm aware of right now, at least that are affecting the U.S., are COVID was started in a lab and escaped a lab, ostensibly entirely by accident. The election was rigged against Trump, and that Trump attempted a coup d'etat to either Trump and or whether Trump knew about it or not depends, I guess, on who you talk. That's the other problem with conspiracy theories, is you can't sit there and say this is the theory, because there's a million iterations of any one theory. But that Trump either knew about or inadvertently started what was an attempted coup in the United States to overthrow the democratically elected president. And there was two other big ones. And in fact, by the way, I wanted to mention before going forward, if anybody has another theory that they would like to ask about, please put it in the live chat, and we'll definitely bring it up. And then there is the moon landing one, but that one's been that one has gone by the wayside. But the one that's always been persistent, and I actually have dabbled in myself. It's the only one I think that I ever found compelling, was the assassination of JFK. So these are some persistent ones. Is there any reason that these? Some aren't persistent. Sorry, because they only one of those was a persistent one. The others are much more common. What causes them to be persistent for that long? And what are your views on any of these? Are these pretty common theories that you've seen across other countries and across the world, or is there anything unique to these theories?
So the question as to why some persist and some don't is a really interesting question. So Brian L. Keeley, who was one of the first philosophers to kind of resurrect talk of conspiracy theories in the discipline, in his 1999 paper of conspiracy theories, talks about this with respect to maturity. There are certain conspiracy theories which appear to be mature in the sense that they're like a suspiciously stinky cheese or stinky egg. They persist. They've got this smell which makes you suspicious of them. Now, we know that some smelly cheeses are good and some stinky eggs. I mean, I currently live in China. Century-old eggs are kind of a thing here. They're a delicacy. They smell awful. I'm told they taste delicious. I'm vegan, so I'll probably never find out. But Brian's point was, look, there are certain conspiracy theories which persist, and they look weird. They look like the kind of theories which aren't particularly well evidenced or argued for, but they're still around. What should we do about them? Now, one reason as to why certain conspiracy theories might still be around is that the people who are spreading them actually might not actually believe them. They may simply be using them insincerely as a political calculus. And I think this is going to be an issue, particularly in the US going forward, due to the success of claiming that the previous election was stolen. There are going to be certain political operatives out there who are very aware that actually fraud in your electoral system is incredibly rare. I mean, really, really rare. But they also know there's a certain partisan voting base who will lap up stories of that type. So they will simply use the hypothesis of election fraud and use the rhetoric of conspiracy without necessarily believing in the conspiracy itself. And indeed, actually, this is what makes Trump such an interesting character, in that Trump is simply the latest in a line of autocratic, demagogic figures like Viktor Orban in Hungary, who have realized that they can use the rhetoric, or at least their advisors have realized they can get the leader to use the rhetoric of conspiracy theory to engage the base without there being any direct evidence that the person in question actually believes the theory themselves. So one reason as to why some theories might persist is that they are being insincerely spread by malign political operators who are simply using them as part of their calculus for staying in power or trying to change the way things work. I mean, for example, I think one of the reasons why there's been such a focus on the origin of COVID-19 is that it allows people to avoid where the real focus should be, which is, why did we fail so badly in our pandemic responses? It's a lot easier to blame someone for starting the virus than it is to go, why was our response so poor? And of course, that's kind of the interesting thing. I come from a nation state, Aotearoa, New Zealand, where our elimination strategy to getting rid of COVID-19 within our borders up until recently has been very successful. So we do have a Delta outbreak in Auckland at the moment. It is largely contained, but the city of Auckland is in a lockdown whilst we sort those things out. But for the majority of the pandemic, we've been living absolutely free and easy lives with no restrictions whatsoever because our government was really good at responding to the pandemic. Thus, there's been very little call for investigating the origin of the virus. Other nation states, which haven't done as well. I don't think the US is doing particularly well.
Don't say it.
There seems to be a lot more focus on asking, where did the virus come from? Because now that your containment system has failed, the focus is now on blaming the people who started it, rather than asking people to be accountable for why did it spread so widely within our borders.
So, are there any theories that? So I could probably never do what you do, and here's the reason why. I would get so sucked up in trying to figure out whether these theories are true or not. I couldn't actually. So it looks to me like you're looking at the meta, at the okay, this is how they work, this is how we process them, this is what. I couldn't do that because I'd be too busy going like, oh wait, maybe we didn't land on the moon. I just get stuck on that and research it for 6 months and then figure out.
See, the big issue is you believe the moon exists. I mean, that's the first flaw.
Oh, here we go. Well, I also believe that the Earth is round, which is a sphere.
Wait,
I should say.
You mean it's not made of cheese, and the cow didn't really jump over the moon? It's got to be really close if cows can jump over it.
Well, precisely. And also, it's turtles all the way down.
It is turtles all the way down, yes. Okay, I have to tell you, so we have, you may not have, okay, I won't tell the solipsist joke. It's so rare I have a philosopher on, I want to tell the solipsist joke, and we have a whole but everybody in there has heard the solipsist joke like 100 times, so I'll skip it. Were there any theories that you saw that are just obviously false, and it seems to be people can't be dissuaded from them, and and every attempt to do so results in the backfire effect. They believe it more, and anything that just surprised you, and you just said, how on earth can we do that? And yet here it is. And is there anything that you can do about either the backfire effect or getting people to start to question a theory?
I mean, the one which still gets me as to why people believed it in the first place is QAnon. So if you do any research into the origins of QAnon and the way that QAnon first appeared in 8chan, then you're looking at the history of a whole bunch of role-playing threads where people pretended to be insiders to various government agencies. So you got these kind of weird anon accounts. And suddenly the QAnon account, the insider within the Trump administration, that appears. And for some reason, that's the one which is taken seriously, even though the other similar accounts were known to be people basically LARPing away. And so it kind of just astounds me that something which we can trace the origin of and explain the origin in context is a theory which is widely believed to be, no, there really is a government insider who was revealing to the world exactly what Trump was doing, except that their revelations were in Nostradamus-esque quatrains, where they'd say things like, the elephant at night is purple. If you watch Fatal Attraction in reverse, the clue is obvious. Remember to say, pip, pip, hello, Trump is watching. And somehow people then spend large amounts of time taking those 4 lines and trying to work out the meaning, leading to basically a kind of religious-like cult nature, where you had the seers, the people who were somehow able to divine the true meaning of these weird phrases. So you didn't just have Q, you had these other people who interpreted Q, and the kind of doctrinal conflicts of which interpreter you would believe versus another, although somehow they managed to resolve that war in a way that most religions would take hundreds of years to do. And it's still believed to this day. And so that's the one which I find kind of weird, and that I can't see why you would start to believe it in the first place. But the people who do believe it, and there do seem to be a fair number of sincere believers, people who actually believe the theory to be true, they really seem very committed to it, as we saw on January 6th earlier this year. People are willing to engage in insurrection based upon theories of this particular type. And I'm aware that the insurrection is not just a QAnon phenomena. There's a whole bunch of Stop the Steal people there, states' rights people there and the like. It was a conglomeration of people with similar political views, some of whom had explicitly conspiratorial views, others of which just had views of the wrong guy won, and I want my guy to be in charge no matter what. And it just bewilders me that a theory that we know the origin of is believed, even though the origin indicates it should always have been treated as just an elaborate fictional game of some kind. So yeah, that's the one which I still find bewildering. I'm also somewhat surprised it's still around. I did think it would basically die off when Biden became president, and yet it's still rumbling away in the background. Now I think about it, that's not that unsurprising. The obvious precursor to QAnon is the Iraqi dinar revaluation theory from the Second Gulf War, where people believed that due to the US going to rebuild Iraq, the Iraqi dinar would be hugely revalued, so people would buy lots of this devalued currency, and then when America finished its rebuild, the dinar was reintroduced, suddenly people become mega rich. Of course, that never occurred. People have continued to engage in that, in producing conspiracy theories to explain why the revaluation is just around the corner. And so once people become invested in a belief, that probably explains why they spend a lot of energy, time, and effort in maintaining it. But at the same time, I just don't know why people came to believe it in the first place.
Yeah, I think we have to do a whole show on just the backfire effect. Yes, Andrew, were you going to say something?
One of the things I've always kind of, because being in the United States, especially with U.S. media, doesn't generally focus on the rest of the world too awfully much. I mean, we seem to be pretty self-absorbed in ourselves. What are some of the theories that conspiracy type theories that are outside of the U.S. that are about the U.S.?
Oh, that's a really good question. So conspiracy theories which concern the US but aren't actually uniquely US ones. So, I mean, of course, within the Middle East, there's the conspiracy theory that the US meddles in electoral politics and regime change in the Middle East all the time, which is one of those warranted conspiracy theories because there is a really, really long history of the US engaging in regime change in the Middle East, as there is a long history of the UK prior to the US doing the same thing. Actually, I was thinking when you were having your discussion about how the US doesn't negotiate with terrorists at the very top of the show, one of the issues, of course, is that if you're someone in the Middle East, it's not the Taliban who are the terrorists. It's the US who have been interfering in politics there for a long time, are the people who commit acts of terror there. It's the Taliban, as far as they're concerned, dealing with terrorists, not the other way around, which is kind of the interesting kind of definitional stuff you get into as to, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And there's actually a huge literature on the way in which the word terrorist has kind of been co-opted for political gain, and the way we apply the label to some people and not others is itself the subject of numerous conspiracy theories. So, yeah, I mean, you've got that particular thing, which is a conspiracy theory about the US, one of which I think is actually warranted given the historical evidence and the like. From my local perspective of Aotearoa, New Zealand, we are aware there's always been a diplomatic push by the US for us to revoke our anti-nuclear stance. And there's always been a suspicion back home that the US are using behind-the-scenes diplomatic channels to persuade particular political parties to oppose the anti-nuclear legislation to bring about a change in perspective to allow US warships to once again enter New Zealand ports and the like. And that has conspiratorial overtones because of the working in secret behind the scenes. And I know that during the elections just after Trump was elected to be president of the US, there were a whole bunch of conspiracy theories about US low-level interference in EU elections. So not doing actual election hacking, but essentially trying to create bot farms and troll farms in order to try to persuade the EU elections to go in a much more right-wing conservative fashion, which didn't seem to work out, but did lead to a large number of very interesting investigative journalism in the EU at the time going, why is Steve Bannon setting up training camps in the EU? What is he trying to achieve there? And why is there US funding for content production farms where all of these teenagers are writing things encouraging people to vote for, say, 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴 in Scandinavia rather than the left-wing politician instead? Is there some kind of concerted conspiracy by the conservative establishment in the US to try and change EU's electoral landscape? So yes, I mean, the US, given as a superpower, is going to be subject to conspiracy theories overseas because A, you do interfere in other people's electoral landscapes. Look at South America. And B, everyone's afraid you're going to start doing it in their part of the world next.
Yeah, our history on that isn't so good. Cuba, Iran. To pick a country. Yeah. Okay. So thanks for pointing that out. Appreciate it. All right. So
to be fair, all superpowers do that.
That is. I think that's true. You had said earlier that Americans are particularly self-absorbed, and I tend to agree, being an American, and it does bother me. We're going to do that. We're going to quote protect our interests. It bothers me when we deny it and say we're better than every other country in the world because we don't do that kind of thing while we're going out and doing that kind of thing. And it bothers me when we don't learn from our mistakes when we do that kind of thing. So, but you're right. I shouldn't just shit on the U.S. because, and what I think Russia so far has been doing far worse, at least in some spheres. So,
and of course, you did learn it from the British, and the British, they did it really. I mean, they did it on a massive scale during the time of empire. I mean, it's kind of astounding that the British are trying to do it again now with trying to resurrect themselves post Brexit, because those of us in the Commonwealth we remember. We remember what the empire was like. It was not a good time.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. As I guess we were part of the empire very briefly.
Oh yeah, so you managed to depose dynastic rule by the British royal family, only to recently resurrect it by trying to have dynastic rule via the Bushes and the Clintons. It's a kind of interesting political approach.
Yeah, but you see, at least we have a choice between which dynasty. I mean, that's what makes our system better, is we can choose which devil we would like to go to sleep with. All right, so I think we're going to start to wrap this up. So I had a question in the live chat. This was, I think, the last question that I had, and I'm curious if Xandring has any more. But the last question that I sort of had was, because I'd asked you one side, I wanted to flip the coin. Were there any conspiracy theories that you said, this can't be real, there's no way this is going to be real? And maybe you didn't even bother investigating, and later you discover, sure enough, there really was something to it, and or it was real and it just caught you way by surprise. Are there any theories, big, small, just something that maybe informed your way of thinking on that?
I mean, I suppose to a certain extent, at least at the very beginning of 2002, I thought that when the US and the UK said, look, we've got evidence that Saddam Hussein is still producing weapons of mass destruction, I was thinking, well, these are big, legitimate, democratically elected governments. I mean, they can't just be making this stuff up, surely. And then as more and more evidence came out, I think they might be lying to me. I mean, not me specifically, they were lying to everyone. They weren't just deliberately going, you, Dentith, we're going to lie to you specifically. But yeah, that was one of those things where I ended up going, maybe I'm a little bit too trusting of government authority, because this is ever so slightly confronting. And I also do remember back in the kind of the early days of when people were discussing things about anthropogenic climate change, that I was probably a little bit too trusting of the skeptical community in the US, your Michael Shermers and the like, who are going, look, we've looked at the kind of models that climate change and anthropogenic climate change people are presenting, and they don't look particularly good. And I go, well, if you've got people like that and Bjorn Larson writing books as to why climate change isn't as big an issue as it turns out to be, then, presumably there's some kind of weird cargo cult group thing going on amongst these people predicting alarmism. And that then turned out to be a case of, actually, it looks like Shermer and co, they're the ones who might be funded by conservative big money think tanks and the oil industry, that they're the ones who are possibly either deluded or producing content for cash. So I suppose those are the ones where I believed one thing and they had to be slowly dissuaded to believe another thing. And at least with the invasion of Iraq, that really was a concerted conspiracy by the US and the UK to persuade people to believe the government line. The climate change thing is slightly more complicated in that, yes, you can do the follow the money thing there, but it's also quite clear some of those skeptics really did believe that doing their own research was going to lead to the correct results. And it turned out actually they A, weren't very good at doing their own research, and B, probably should have been deferring to expertise the entire time.
So, somebody was asking this in live chat. So was there, so for example, for me, the fact that this COVID was man-made, I really did not believe at all. And now I'm starting to say, maybe I haven't done any research into it, but with the number of people who I trust who are looking into it and saying, there's something to this, I'm starting to say, hey, maybe until I research it, I won't. But is there anything like that you really didn't and are starting to turn on by that one or another? I don't know, anything like that? Or
so, I mean, this is one of these things where I haven't done the research myself, but my partner is a biologist who works in microbiology. She knows how CRISPR works and the like. She's adamant that according to all the stuff she's looked at, there's just no indication that COVID-19 has been genetically manipulated. So the whole "it was built in a lab" thing, as far as she's concerned, doesn't work. She has a PhD. I'm willing to defer to her expertise on that, given that I'm just a lowly philosopher. What do I know about science? I think it probably is still legitimate to ask questions about the leak hypothesis there. Although, once again, I think the important aspect of dealing with a pandemic is the pandemic response. It doesn't really matter where the virus comes from. What actually matters is whether we've got systems in place to be able to deal with pandemics, because as so many evolutionary biologists have pointed out, this will not be the last pandemic. In fact, as our population grows and we're living in closer proximity to animal populations, the chances of another virus making the species jump is going to go up and up and up. And if it turns out we can't cope with this pandemic, the next one, if it occurs relatively soon, is going to be dangerous, because it's going to take us a long time to get back to normal from a medical perspective post this particular pandemic. If we get struck by a second pandemic in the next 10 to 15 years, that could be a civilization-ending style event. We may not be able to cope at all. So I'm much more focused on the conspiracies around why aren't people responding well to the pandemic? What is going on with particular types of governments around the globe? Why don't they want to engage with the best science on these things? Those are the ones which I think are slightly more interesting, because those are the ones which will have long-term effect on the world as we know it.
All right, Xandring, any last questions, comments, thoughts, anything like that before we head on out?
Do you have any conspiracies that you come across that you just absolutely loathe? You can't stand them and you wish they were burned from the memory of all of the population so you never had to hear about it again?
Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. I mean, frankly, they should never have occurred in the first place. B, after World War II, that should have been it. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theory should have just withered on the vine and died. The fact that they are still around, and that unfortunately there's a certain class of person who will enter any community and then start whispering claims about, but really it was the Jews who did it, continues to really, really make me angry. The idea that we are still using the same old scapegoats time and time again and blaming the problems of the world as we have constructed it on a group of people who have no power in that respect. And yet, for some reason, we've decided, no, you are going to be the scapegoats for all of our problems in the West. This marginalized community who have been historically marginalized for centuries, we're just going to continue marginalizing you by blaming you for every single ill we come across. That's the one that makes me angry. If I could do one thing by clicking my fingers, I would make anti-Semitic conspiracy theories just disappear from history.
All right. Well, that is a very good answer. Thank you, Dr. M. Dentith, for coming on today. We really appreciate it. You were very accommodating, short notice, and you came on. So thank you very much for doing that. It was an absolutely delightful show. I think I can speak for most of the people in the live chat. I think there's somebody there trying to argue that the Big Bang never occurred. But other than that, that it was absolutely delightful. Thank you. Where can people find you if they want to get more information? Now, we do have your books linked in the description, but where can people find you if they're on Twitter or anywhere else that they may be looking for you?
So you can find me on Twitter at the handle Conspiracism. I also host a podcast with my friend Josh Addison called The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, which is a weekly podcast in which we either look at contemporary conspiracy theories, historical conspiracy theories, or go through and review classic papers from the academic literature on conspiracy theory. So some weeks we're having fun looking at wacky claims, some weeks we're having fun looking at historical cases of conspiracies, and some weeks we're getting very vexed by the way that academics write about conspiracy theories in weirdly formalesque tones. So yes, you can find me on Twitter at Conspiracism, and the podcast is once again The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
All right, Xandring,
I'm going to have to look that one up.
Absolutely. Xandring, thank you very much for joining us. Doctor, once again, thank you. And we will see you all on Friday for After Dark. We're going to do our nightly hang there. Anybody who wants to is invited. Open mic, come on in. We'll discuss any topics, talk about the shows we've done, talk about whether or not we're gonna default, whatever you guys want to talk about. If you like the show this far, please don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave. It really does help us out in the algorithm. And also, we'll be dropping a link to the Discord in just a minute. Come on in and chat. Figure out, we'd love to talk with you guys about this topic, any other topic. I'm in there, a whole bunch of other people, and we cover all the news that's going on in the U.S. and in the world. So please check it out. Until then, thank you all for coming, and we will see you guys on Friday.